That smell hits first, rot and musk that turns your stomach. Then pure dread as something 7 feet tall rises from the trees, swaying, staking its claim. You're in Boggy Creek territory now. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. If you were in your tweens in the 1970s and lived near a drive-in movie theater, there's a good chance your first horror movie was The Legend of Boggy Creek. For a G-rated movie, it sure scared the crap out of a lot of kids. If you haven't heard of it, it's a 1972 low-budget movie made in and around Fouke, including some of the actors portraying themselves, recounting the supposedly true story of the Boggy Creek Monster of Fouke, Arkansas. But is any of this true? Well, there may be more to this legend than you might think. The movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek, brought to the screen, among many other creepy sightings, stories of the terrifying encounters by the Ford and Taylor families. Now, I'm going to warn you right up front. The reporting on this is really hard to pin down. Some sources say it's the Fords and the Taylors. Other sources say it's the Fords and the Turners. So we're just going to go with the Taylors. And before we dive into their story, I want to give you an idea of the area that we are talking about. Fouke is located in the far southwestern corner of Arkansas, less than 10 miles east of the Texas border and less than 20 miles north of Louisiana. Just to the west and south of Fouke is the Mercer Bayou, fed by the Sulphur River, which has hundreds of little tributaries just like Boggy Creek. This place is about 1,000 acres of muddy, slow flow, snake-infested, gator-infested territory. Not for the faint of heart. And a great place for something big to hide. So, it's the last week of April, 1971, and the Fords, Donna, Patricia, and the Taylors, Charles and Elizabeth, move into a rental house on the north side of Fouke, just off of Highway 71, about 4 miles north of town. And again, there is some confusion as to whether Elizabeth was a Ford or a Taylor. So we're just going to go with Taylor because how fun is it that it's Elizabeth Taylor?
An impressive title.
So they move in and the guys are eager to start work on Monday. Now, from my understanding, the guys work the night shift, so the women are home alone with the kids. On Wednesday, April 28th, the women hear something prowling around on the porch outside. Freaks them out enough that they make a run for it to the landlord's house next door. The landlord checks it out, but doesn't find anything. So the girls give him a big thanks for his help and go back home. On Friday, hello weekend, not only are the men home from work, but Don's brother Bobby and a friend, Corky Hill, come over to stay for the weekend and get in some fishing. Friday afternoon, those two head out to the creek to get some lines in the water when they see an odd 3-toed footprint in the mud of the creek bank. Between the print and the ominous vibe they're picking up from the woods, they decide screw this and head back to the house. That night, their porch prowler is not only back, but tries to get in the house. Everyone inside is freaked out, but they stay inside and nothing else happens. The next night, so Saturday, May 1st, Bobby's in the bathroom, busy with his business, when he sees a face at the bathroom window. He freaks out and stumbles his way back to the living room and grabs a butcher knife and sits down. Elizabeth is sitting on the couch when she sees a big, hairy hand come through the window. At first, she thinks it's a bear, but that's no bear. According to a statement in the Texarkana Gazette, it had heavy hair all over it, and it had claws, and I could see its eyes. They looked like coals of fire, real red. It didn't make any noise, except you could hear it breathing. Don and Charles grab a flashlight and a shotgun and go outside, along with Bobby, looking for the intruder. And they find it. It's a 7-foot tall, 3-foot wide at the chest, bipedal hairy animal. They shoot at it several times, but either they're lousy shots or the shots have no effect because everybody sees it run into the field next door. Don calls Constable Walraven, who comes over and checks the place out, but doesn't see anything. But he leaves an extra shotgun and flashlight with him just in case, says good luck, and drives away. Don, Charles, and Bobby stand guard out on the porch, and it doesn't take long before they hear a crashing sound from the back of the house. The thing is trying to break in the back door. The men shine it with their flashlights and fire several rounds. The beast takes off running toward the woods. The men fire off a couple more shots and watch the thing fall to the ground. The three of them start walking towards the wood line to find out what it is that they just shot when they hear the women inside the house start screaming. Bobby turns around to head back to the house as Don and Charles continue toward the beast on the ground. As Bobby is running up the porch stairs to the front door, something in the shadows grabs him. I felt a hairy arm come over my shoulder, and the next thing I knew, we were on the ground. The thing was breathing real hard, and his eyes were about the size of a $50 and real red. Bobby manages to wrestle himself free and practically break down the front door in his effort to get back in the house. Don and Charles hear Bobby screaming, so they turn around and head back to the house too. By the time they get there, the monster is gone. Bobby doesn't look like he has any life-threatening injuries, but he's pretty scratched up and starting to go into shock. Don and Patricia pour Bobby into the car and head to Constable Walraven's house. Walraven sends them on to the hospital in Texarkana, and he puts a call into the hospital to say, hey, these people are on their way, and I want Bobby tested for the presence of alcohol. According to Patricia, Bobby's kind of in and out of it the whole way to the hospital, and each time he comes to, he starts thrashing around and trying to kick out the car windows. So each time, Don has to knock him out again. I know, sounds like a Burt Reynolds movie. But that's what she told the papers. Bobby was tested for alcohol, and the test showed he hadn't had a drop to drink. His scratches are treated, and he's released. In the meantime, Constable Walraven heads out to the Ford house and stays there until 5 a.m., but the monster does not return. As morning comes, more officers arrive at the house to take note of a few areas of damage to the house. They also find some weird 3-toed tracks in the dirt around the house. And thanks to the doctor at the hospital putting in a call to a reporter buddy of his, the reporters start showing up too. But by the time they get on the scene, there's a U-Haul in the driveway and the Fords are filling it up as fast as they can. They leave that house that day and never return. Between the media and the amateur monster hunters, the place becomes a madhouse, and the rest is pretty much history. There were 2 different theories circulating at the time as to what this thing could have been. One thought is that it was a large cougar, since it looked like there may have been some kind of cat living under the front porch. Okay, maybe they could have seen its eye shine through the window, and I might even buy mistaking a paw for a hand coming through the window. But no cougar I know walks on 2 legs and can take several shots from a shotgun. The other theory is that there was a neighborhood horse that had a habit of coming into neighboring yards. Seriously? So a horse is going to clop, clop, clop its way up onto the porch and put its hoof through the window? And the people inside are going to mistake that for a hand? And then it's going to run away on 2 legs? But no horse with bullet holes in it was ever found either. So much for that theory. All of the newspaper coverage of this insanity inspires a man named Charles Pierce from Texarkana. Fun fact! Did you know that the name Texarkana comes from mashing up Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana? Okay, maybe you knew that, but I didn't. So Charles finds an investor, makes his movie for about $150K, and it goes on to become the 11th highest grossing movie of 1972, grossing somewhere between $20 and $25 million, and will remain an eternal indie movie standout with its ROI of over 12,000%. So that is the encounter that most people think of when they think of the Boggy Creek Monster. It is by far the most impactful scene in the movie. And there were more sightings reported in the paper, but it doesn't take long for the stories to fade away. And because there are no more stories to read, most people think that the monster faded away too. Au contraire, mon frère. Nothing could be further from the truth. The number of sightings in this area is actually kind of staggering. The first reported sightings actually come from the Arkansas Gazette and the Memphis Inquirer on May 9th, 1851. Two hunters spot a large, hair-covered animal trying to steal a calf from their cattle herd. They said it was very human-like, but also that it was gigantic in stature. However, we may have to take that report with a grain of salt right alongside the next report from 1856. That report stems from an incident just north of Texarkana. There's a group of men actually chasing a wild man, trying to catch it alive. One man approaches the wild man on horseback. The wild man sees him coming, rushes him, drags him to the ground, attacks him, takes the saddle off the horse, destroys it, jumps on the horse, bareback, and rides away. I think in this case, we have a true wild man on our hands. The next encounter we know about comes from a woman named Kate. Kate is the sister to Fouke resident William Smith. We will be hearing more about him later. Kate claims that in 1908, when she was 10 years old on a family fishing trip to the Mercer Bayou, she's playing in the woods and sees a hairy manimal watching her from the bushes. But it disappears in a heartbeat. Kate actually keeps that sighting secret until she's literally on her deathbed in the early 70s. In the 1940s, sightings start to pop up in a little township called Jonesville, which is just a few miles to the southwest of Fouke. So the Fouke Monster was originally known as the Jonesville Monster. Fast forward to 1965, and we get one of the more heart-pounding and most retold encounter stories, that of Lynn Crabtree. Lynn is out in the woods squirrel hunting and comes face to face with the hairy beast. He fires 3 shots at it before turning and sprinting for home. The story is one of the most often told because not only is it reenacted in the Boggy Creek Monster movie, but also because Lynn is one of the sons of Smokey Crabtree, another person we will hear more about later. But suffice to say, in a small town like Fouke, with a population all of like 500 people, there are certain families that everybody knows. The Crabtrees are one of those families. I ran into Crabtrees everywhere researching this one. And Lynn is not the only one of Smokey's sons to have had an encounter. His son Fred does as well. Fred's is a little less dramatic. He's out hunting and sees a hairy, humanish figure watching him in the distance. But it's that humanism part that keeps Fred from taking a shot at all. And the beast just disappears. Between those two encounters, a fire is ignited in Smokey to hunt for this creature for the rest of his life. Now, truth be told, there are way more encounters than I can even think about covering today. So I'm just going to hit a couple of the highlights. In 1974, Dave and Mike Giles are deer hunting with a friend of theirs just a little south of Fouke. One of them takes down a buck, and the 3 load it into the back of the truck to take it home to clean it. The guys are almost home when something with a lot of hair, looking kind of apish, runs out of the woods, jumps on the trailer they're towing, and starts wailing on the 2 motorcycles strapped to the trailer. The driver slams on the brakes, and all 3 of them just stare at this thing in stunned silence. Once the beast has seemingly taken out all of its aggression on the obviously offensive motorcycles, it jumps off the trailer and disappears into the woods. Or how about this one from 1982? Henry Elrod is out on his boat in a part of Mercer Bayou known as the Deadening. That's not ominous or anything. Checking his trot line. A trot line is when you string a line from bank to bank across the water and set up several lines off that one, each with its own hook, so you can catch a number of fish at one shot. This spot has not been very good to Harry over the last few days, but he's giving it one more shot. So he's out checking his lines to see what he's caught when he tugs on one line that won't come up. He gives the line a few sharp tugs, trying to break it loose from whatever it must be snagged on, when a tall, hairy beast rises up from the water in front of him, holding his line. Harry abandons ship and swims for shore. Well, at least he knows why he hasn't been catching any fish. And if those aren't crazy enough, how about this one? October of 2000, Stacy Hudson is a bow hunter who's been hunting in the woods south of Fouke for years. On this particular evening, he goes out to a place overlooking the Sulphur River, checks it out, hangs up his deer stand about 12 feet off the ground, and goes home. The next morning, well before dawn, he heads out to his deer stand and found his deer stand was all twisted around. Weird, but whatever. He fixes the stand, climbs up, and sets his arrows on the gun rest and settles in. Everything is camouflaged except the silvery tips of the arrows. He's sitting for a while as it rolls around to about 5:30 a.m. Sun hasn't come up yet, but the moon is out, so Stacy can still kind of see around him. He hears something walking up from the woods behind him. So he slowly turns his head around to see what it is. It's still a little too dark for a good look, but he can tell it's something big and black. So he's thinking, well, it's too big to be a hog. Maybe it's a cow? Turns back around, just hoping that whatever it is will just wander away and not scare off the deer. That's when he feels something brush his leg 10 feet off the ground. He freezes. He didn't hear anything climb that tree. And he sits there, his breath literally stuck in his chest. A shiny black hand with huge fingers reaches up and grabs for Stacy's arrows. But the broadheads are razor sharp, so when the oversized fingers close around them, whatever this thing is screams in pain. Scared out of his mind, but feeling pretty much like a sitting duck, Stacy lets out his own loud scream, hoping to scare whatever it is away. And whether it was Stacy's scream, the searing pain of new cuts on its fingers, or both, the invader runs away, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. Stacy stays put until daylight, at which point he takes off for his truck and never looks back. One of the Fouke monster's more prominent researchers is William Lunsford. Raised on a farm just outside of Texarkana, just a couple of miles north of the Sulphur River, Will's experiences around the creature began when he was just a kid, but his fascination with it is born from a particularly hair-raising experience he had in 1977 at just 17 years old. At 6'2" and 240 pounds, Will isn't afraid of much, and the Bowie knife he carries with him pretty much takes care of the rest. Will's out fishing one late afternoon and walking to one last fishing spot before it gets too dark, when he is stopped in his tracks by an overwhelming sense of dread and a putrid odor. Just as he's ready to brush off the fears being silly, a dark, fur-covered being to the left of the road that had just been hiding behind a tree branch starts to stand. Will watches as its head goes up and up and up to a full height of 7.5 to 8 feet tall. Will is freaking out. This is not a bear or anything else he has ever seen. And he knows in that moment he's looking at the Fouke monster. He is frozen in fear as the creature walks on two legs out onto the road, staring Will down as it rocks back and forth in kind of this this is my house kind of way. Will thinks, this is it. I'm gonna die right here. But after a few moments, the beast turns and walks back into the forest. That encounter eventually leads Will to a personal quest to find answers about this creature that he saw that's not supposed to exist. Will has written a book called Searching for the Unfindable, My Quest for the Arkansas Bigfoot, where he goes into great detail about his adventures in looking for this thing. But I want to share just one of his anecdotes just to remind you that the Legend of Boggy Creek is nothing to be trifled with. Sometime around the year 2012, Will and his son Reese finally twist the arm of his wife Cindy, a non-believer, hard enough to get her out into the woods on her first Squatch research trip to an area that had been particularly active lately. They don't see any manimal creature that morning, but they do find tracks, some weird tree structures, and heard some weird noises. As it rolls on up to lunchtime, Cindy helps the boys mark some trees with Christmas garland, put out some bait, and set up some trail cameras. What she would not do is help them spread some pheromone-scented stuff on nearby tree stumps. Nope, have fun with that. Once the boys are done, they all troop back home for food, and Cindy says, that's enough for me for one day. So after lunch, the boys head back there on their own. But what they find when they get there is completely insane. The spot they had just left a couple of hours earlier now has large trees that have been pushed over, with other logs and broken limbs now blocking the path. And other trees are snapped off at about 9 feet off the ground. Whatever it was tore Cindy's Christmas garland from the trees and hung it on other trees. Something had come storming through there, just a little upset. And the cherry on top is that Will has both before and after pictures of the mayhem. I, for one, hope he publishes those pictures. I tried to see if he had a website or anything where he would be posting that kind of stuff, and I don't see anything. But he does do podcasts and lectures if you'd like to hear more of his stories. Now, to be sure, there are lots of bits and pieces of evidence, recordings of sounds, anomalous tree structures, and I even happen to know that there are pictures and videos out there that haven't been published. Ugh. And lots of pictures of footprints. The problem with the Fouke Monster is that we're really not sure exactly what made the prints. Because in these sulfur river bottoms, it's not uncommon to find prints that only have 3 toes. The prints outside the Ford house in May of '71 had 3 toes. And not even 2 months later, a whole string of them are found in the bean field of William Smith. Remember the guy we talked about at the beginning whose sister Kate actually saw the beast? Well, June 12th, 1971, Yother Kennedy, the guy who works William Smith's field, spent the day plowing the field that sits on the southern end of Boggy Creek. The next day, June 13th, he went out to take a look at the field when he notices a trail of long 3-toed prints going all the way across the field. He calls William and says, you might want to come and take a look at this. William calls a few other people, including Constable Ernest Walraven, Sheriff Greer, Deputy Phillips, and Game Warden Carl Galen. None of them have ever seen prints like this before. A month later, Frank Schambach, an archaeologist at Southern State College, which is now Southern Arkansas University, pronounces there is a 99% chance the tracks are a hoax, presumably by looking at the pictures. But maybe someone forgot to mention the fact that there is about 57 inches between each print. The average human male stride length is 30 inches, which makes it highly unlikely that some would-be hoaxer is putting on a pair of monster feet and stomping through the field. That being said, one point in favor of the hoaxer theory is that the tracks apparently looked as if they walked across that field actively trying not to step on the new rows of bean seeds. What wild animal do you know that would do that? Local tracker Chip Walker takes a look at the tracks and concludes that they're alligators. alligator tracks. Okay, I could maybe buy that. The Mercer Bayou area has lots of alligators, so maybe one who has only 3 toes instead of the usual 4 went through the field. I mean, there are pictures of alligator tracks that look very similar. But how do you account for the 57-inch span between the tracks? Of course, the holy grail of evidence always has been and always will be a body. Why has no one found a body? Well, who says they haven't? First of all, I would say there is a good case to be made that they bury their dead. There are a few animal species that do it. We do it, and Bigfoot seem to be an awful lot like us. And second, who says we've never seen a body? Will Lunsford tells a story that happened in 2012 in his book about a woman he'd worked with for 35 years who had an interesting encounter. It should be noted that Will had never spoken with her before about the subject of either the Fouke Monster or Bigfoot in general. But one day, he brings in the plaster cast of a new track he'd found to show somebody else. The woman sees the cast and says, "I've seen a Bigfoot." She goes on to tell William that a year earlier, she's hanging out at a reunion with her sorority sisters when the husband of one of the sisters comes rolling up in a truck and trailer, hauling it home from an extended work trip. The girls, who all knew him from their school days, all surrounded his truck to say, "Hey, and what's in the trailer?" He tells them, "Put your phones away." And he opens the top of the trailer. According to her, inside that trailer was an 8-foot-tall, hairy body. And that's without the head. In another instance from sometime around 2000 or 2001, a man came into the Monster Mart convenience store in Fouke, was chatting it up with now owner Denny Roberts, when the discussion turned to strange things the man had seen in the area while working. The man tells Denny that he'd been doing survey work for the Army Corps of Engineers for a new highway project. He was in a wooded area south of Fouke when he sees, just lying on the ground, the remains of some kind of dead animal that's about the size of a large man, covered in dark, matted fur that did not appear to be a bear or any other kind of animal he recognized. But there's nothing he could do about it at the moment to try to figure it out. So he just went about his work. The next day, he went back to the same spot to continue surveying, and that large, man-sized body was just gone. And if you're shouting at your TV right now, "What about Smokey's skeleton?" I am way ahead of you. That's right. Good old Smokey was rumored to be in possession of a Boggy Creek monster skeleton. Sometime around 1991, Smokey gets a phone call that puts his butt in the car for a trip to Louisiana post-haste. Somebody had a skeleton they think he might be interested in. Smokey gets there, looks at the skeleton, and while maybe not convinced it's the Fouke Monster, is still interested enough to strike a deal for 1/3 ownership of the remains and any future profits and the right to show them publicly. He brings them home to Fouke and sets them up in a nice plexiglass case to try to prevent any further decay. Coughs up about $10,000 for DNA testing that ends up only telling him that the remains are not human. Wow. $10,000 doesn't go as far as it used to. The remains are indeed those of something that was very large. The skeleton in the case is about 8 feet long with no head. But everything else about it is so bizarre that no one can tell by looking at it exactly what it is or was. Over time, Smokey shows the remains to a few people and word gets out. Now Smokey is dealing with people offering upwards of $6,500 to buy the skeleton, others telling him it's just a Siberian tiger, and people calling him and saying they're from the Smithsonian and will be there the next morning to confiscate the remains. I'll give you 3 guesses as to what Smokey told those people, and the first 2 don't count. But Smokey thinks those remains are strange enough that he agrees to let them be examined for a 1995 documentary, The Hunt for Bigfoot. In the documentary, the remains are studied by 2 biology professors and a forensic anthropologist, none of whom give anything close to a definitive answer as to what this thing is. But thanks to the investigative work of Lyle Blackburn, author of both The Beast of Boggy Creek, The True Story of the Fouke Monster, and Boggy Creek Casebook, Fouke Monster Encounters 1908 to present, we do know what this thing is. As it turns out, there's a guy in Jefferson, Texas who keeps exotic animals.
It's fun, is it not?
His Siberian tiger dies of pneumonia. The body is sold to someone from Marshall, Texas, who either gives it or sells it to a taxidermist who keeps the head, skin, tail, and claws and dumps the rest on a property in Karnak, Texas. The landowner discovers the remains, calls the sheriff, who comes out with the vet and says, "They're not human, and we'll be back tomorrow to take them away." The landowner's nephew sees the remains, think they could be the Fouke Monster, scoops him up and takes them to Vivian, Louisiana, and promptly calls Smokey Crabtree. Now, I am totally on board with the Siberian tiger conclusion. If the skeleton is missing the parts that make it most identifiable as a cat, how can you tell it's a cat? There are not many pictures of this thing around, but the Hunt for Bigfoot documentary itself is on YouTube if you want to see it. It's hard to make out any of the real details of the skeleton, but it's easy to see the rib cage, which looks way more like the narrow, deep rib cage of a cat than the wide, shallow rib cage of a primate. Close, but no cigar. Smokey would go on to write 3 books about his life and, in part, how it's been shaped by his decades-long search for the Boggy Creek Monster, which, ironically, he never got to see for himself. He passed away in 2016, and his legendary presence in the Fouke Monster community is dearly missed. But the torch has been passed to other great researchers like Lyle Blackburn and Will Lunsford, just to name a few, who continue to search for the Fouke Monster to this day. If you're looking for some adventure and have an extra case of mosquito repellent laying around, maybe take a trip down there. I would say you have a better than average chance of actually having some kind of encounter. Remember, the sightings haven't stopped. They continue on a regular basis to this day. When you do see that mostly human face staring back at you from just behind the tree line, and then run like your butt's on fire to get out of those woods, make sure you stop at the Monster Mart in Fouke and tell them your story. I am pretty sure they will believe you. And with more researchers getting into the field and the ease with which anyone can shoot their own mini documentaries, in my opinion, it is only a matter of time before incontrovertible proof makes its way from the depths of the bayou to the TV screen. Special shout out to Lyle Blackburn for this one. Not only did I get a ton of information from his 2 books, but he was also gracious enough to let us use some of the pictures as well. Thank you so much, Lyle. If you want to learn more about the shenanigans happening around Fouke, go out and get both of his books, as well as Will Lunsford's book. All 3 of them are fantastic. I will put links to all of them in the description, as well as add them to my Amazon store book list. If this episode has your heart pumping and you want to stay on that adrenaline rush, go ahead and click on this episode right here. It'll do the job, I promise. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.